Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Brandon and this is Singletons. We love Magic the Gathering here, especially the Singleton formats, and especially on a budget. This is going to be the first deck tech on my channel, so to celebrate, I'm going to show off one of my absolute favorite budget decks and favorite decks for new EDH players. This is Jarad, Golgari Lich Lord. At the end of the video, I'm going to show off two full lists, one for $50 in paper and one for 10 tickets on Magic Online, so either way you play, you'll have a great budget option. Now let's get started. For black, green, 4 mana total, Jarad is a 2/2 legendary zombie elf with 3 abilities. Jarad gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. For a generic black, green, and sack another creature, each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. And you can sacrifice a swamp and a forest to return Jarad from your graveyard to your hand. So let's break this down. Jarad's first ability says that as long as you can fill your graveyard full of other creatures, Jarad is never going to be just a 2/2. He's going to be a 7/7 or an 11/11 or maybe even a 21/21 without you having to do all that much. So he's going to threaten a lot of damage on his own, and he might be able to push through a commander damage victory over 1 or 2 players. Second, if you have 3 mana and a big creature to sacrifice, Jarad is going to deal damage to each opponent equal to that creature's power. So if you have an 8/8 sitting around, and maybe your opponent wants to remove it or board wipe or something like that, and you've got the 3 mana open, you just sacrifice it and deal 24 damage to your opponents. This is an easy way to knock out an opponent out of nowhere, while also dragging down your other opponent's life totals for when it's their turn. Lastly, you can sacrifice a swamp and a forest to return Jarad from your graveyard to your hand. A lot of people overlook this ability because if he's going to die, just send him back to the command zone and recast him from there. But each time you do so, he costs 2 additional mana, so late in the game he can easily cost 8, 10 or more mana. Well, instead of that, how about you just let him die and then sacrifice your 2 lands? Bring him back to your hand and now you can cast him for 4 again. And as long as you have the extra lands to sacrifice, you can always cast him for just 4. There are a few different ways a deck like this can go, so we're going to focus on filling up our yard as much as possible and then playing creatures that get bigger based on the number of creatures in the graveyard. First up, we've got Boneyard Worm and Splinterfright. Both of them are going to have power and toughness equal to the number of creature cards in our graveyard. Splinterfright is going to be 1 more mana, but it has trample and of course has the added ability that at the beginning of your upkeep you will mill 2 cards, so it's just going to further along the strategy of putting creatures into your graveyard. Next up we have the Lurgoyf, Mortivore, and Night Howler. All 3 of these cards are going to have a power and toughness equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards, opponents included. Mortivore can regenerate itself, Night Howler can be bestowed onto a creature to give its ability to another creature, and then when that creature dies, Night Howler will drop onto the battlefield as its own creature. And then finally, Lurgoyf's special ability is that it has 1 toughness on its own. Now, normally with these cards you have to be careful because if you play a Mortivore and there are no creature cards in any graveyards, it will just be a 0/0 and it will just die. Lurgoyf will never be a 0/0, so you can play it onto an empty board and it will always survive. And finally we have the Big Daddy himself, Lord of Extinction. For 3, a black and a green, 5 mana total, he is a star creature elemental with power and toughness each equal to the number of cards in all graveyards. We're not talking creatures anymore, all cards. Not everyone plays a whole lot of creatures. Everyone plays cards and everyone has cards go to their graveyards. It is not unreasonable for him to become a 20/20 or higher, even hitting a 40/40, so we can just sacrifice him to Jarad and wipe out the whole table in 1 shot. Now that we have those creatures, we need ways to fill our yard to make them bigger and make them worth playing. To start, we have Golgari Thug, Stinkweed Imp, and Golgari Grave Troll. These all have Dredge, which say that if they're in your graveyard and you would draw a card, instead you can mill either 4, 5, or 6 cards and return them back to your hand. This is a great way to fill up your yard while getting back creatures that can help you with their useful other abilities. Golgari Thug can return a creature from your graveyard to the top of your deck, Stinkweed Imp has pseudo Death Touch, and the Grave Troll enters the battlefield with counters on it equal to the number of creatures in your graveyard, and you can regenerate it. The Troll especially is a heavy 1/2 punch with Jarad in the late game. You can play the Troll, it'll have power equal to the number of creatures in your graveyard. Sacrifice it to Jarad, deal that much damage to each opponent, and on your next turn, instead of drawing, mill 6, put the Troll into your hand, play the Troll, it will most likely be bigger than it was last turn, sacrifice it again, rinse and repeat. Cards like Satyr Wayfinder, Winding Way, and Grisly Salvage will let you look at the top 4 or 5 cards of your deck, put a certain number of them into your hand, and put the rest into your graveyard. For added utility, we have Buried Alive, which will let you search your library for 3 creatures and put those into your graveyard, perfect for when you know you want to reanimate something. And we have Nyx Weaver, which not only puts 2 cards into your graveyard at the beginning of your turn, but you can also exile it and pay 3 mana to return a card from your graveyard to your hand. And the most powerful out of these cards is Hermit Druid. For 1 and a green, he's a 1/1 human druid creature with green and tap. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a basic land card. Put that card into your hand and all other cards revealed this way into your graveyard. If left unchecked, Hermit Druid can easily put half of your deck into your graveyard in just a few turns, and the more powerful you build your deck, the less basic lands you have, the faster he's going to be able to do that. Hermit Druid is easily one of the first cards I recommend to upgrade your graveyard-based decks. Now that our graveyard is full, let's use it to our full advantage. Eternal Witness and Bala Ged Recovery will both let you put any card from your graveyard back into your hand, while Dread Return and Reanimate will let you put any creature from your graveyard back onto the battlefield. We also have Ramen Excavator, which is going to let us make our land drops out of our graveyard, and World Shaper, which can mill us a little bit, but is mostly just going to die and then put all of the lands from our graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. Speaking of, let's talk about a few more traditional ways to ramp. We have the normal mana dorks like Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystic, but we also have a couple special dorks in Millikin and Skull Prophet. Millikin will tap to add 1 generic mana to your pool, but will also mill you for 1 card. Skull Prophet, on the other hand, can tap to add either a black or a green, or if you don't want to do that at all, you can tap it just to mill 2. We also can't skip Deathrite Shaman, which can utilize anyone's graveyards to give you mana, give you 2 life, or make each of your opponents lose 2 life. Next, we also have Sakura Tribe Elder and Dawn Treader, which you can sacrifice to put a basic land into play. And we have Springbloom Druid, Mulder Hulk, and Wood Elves, which are creatures that will also let you put lands into play when they enter the battlefield. Now let's move on to card draw. In Black-Green, we've got some great options. If you're looking for consistency, then Read the Bones for 2 and a black, says scry 2, then draw 2 cards, with a small drawback of you losing 2 life. We also have Harmonize for 4 mana, which just says draw 3 cards. Guardian Project is 3 and a green for an enchantment that says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. In Commander, this just means that whenever you play a non-token creature, you'll get to draw a card. And then whenever that creature dies, Moldervine Reclamation will let you draw a card and gain a life. For card selection, we have Sylvan Library and Underrealm Lich, which are going to do very similar things. Sylvan Library is 1 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your draw step, you can choose to draw 2 additional cards. Out of the 3 cards that you've drawn, you can put 1, 2, or 0 of them back on the top of your library. For each card that you kept over 1, you take 4 life. So you can just draw 3 cards and accept an 8 life punishment. Underrealm Lich, on the other hand, says that anytime you would draw a card, instead look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand and the other 2 straight into your graveyard. You can also pay 4 life to tap him and gain indestructible until end of turn. Finally, if you want some potentially more explosive draws, we have Rishkar's Expertise and Return of the Wild Speaker, which are going to draw you cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Rishkar's Expertise is a sorcery for 4 green, which after the draw effect resolves will let you cast a card with converted mana cost 5 or less from your hand without paying its cost. Return of the Wild Speaker, on the other hand, is 4 and a green for an instant. It will only draw you cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, but there's a second mode on the card you can choose if you really need to that will give all of your non-humans +3/+3 until end of turn. And you actually might choose this ability a bit more often than you would think, because we do have a small token sub-theme in this deck. To take advantage of how stuffed our yard is going to be, we have Spider Spawning, Kessig Cagebreakers, and Azoni Thousand-Eyed, which are going to put creature tokens onto the battlefield equal to the number of creatures we already have in our graveyard. Worm Harvest is going to do the same thing, but it's going to count the number of lands in our graveyard. And then finally, Corrosive Guildmage and Feed the Pack are going to allow us to sacrifice creatures to add tokens to the battlefield equal to the sacrificed creature's toughness. Sometimes one big creature just isn't enough, so we'll have to push through damage with a bunch of little creatures. Brawn is 3 and a green for a 3/3 incarnation creature with trample, And as long as brawn is in your graveyard and you control a forest, creatures you control have trample. Overwhelming Stampede for 3 green is going to give all of our creatures trample and +X until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. And then Triumph of the Hordes for 2 green is going to give all of our creatures +1/+1 trample and infect until end of turn. Next, let's talk about removal so we can help clear the way for our creatures to get in. Shriekmaw, Ravenous Chupacabra, and Avatar of Woe are all standard creature removal. Avatar of Woe has the added ability of being able to remove a creature each turn, and you can play it early if you have creatures in your graveyard. Plaguecrafter, one of my recent favorites, is 2 and a black for a 3/2 human shaman. When Plaguecrafter enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker. Each player who can't discards a card. This can get around hexproof and protection, it can help remove a planeswalker, and if your opponent doesn't have anything on board at all, it'll still make them discard a card. Drown in Filth will also let you get around Indestructible. For a black and a green, this sorcery says, choose target creature, put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard, then that creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn for each land card in your graveyard. If you need to get rid of any pesky enchantments or artifacts, Caustic Caterpillar and Reclamation Sage will do just that for you, and Molder Slug for 3 green says, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices an artifact. Now you may be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, that's going to destroy our artifacts too, isn't it? And yes, that's true, but if you've been paying attention, we haven't listed any artifacts yet. In fact, in both versions of this deck, I only have 1 artifact in the list. So Molder Slug is going to tear apart our opponent's Soul Rings and Lightning Greaves and all of those other artifacts that we either can't afford or don't fit into our deck, while never touching us at all. As for board wipes, Deathbringer Regent and Toxic Deluge will let you destroy all creatures in the battlefield. Gaze of Granite is an X spell and will destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X or less. And Living Death is 3 black for a sorcery. Each player exiles all creatures from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures they control, then puts all the cards they exiled this way onto the battlefield. In simple terms, this is just going to swap each player's battlefield with their graveyard, which our graveyard is going to have way more stuff in it than our opponents, so we're going to win that trade. Lastly, for a couple miscellaneous cards, first we have Perpetual Timepiece, our only artifact for 2 generic mana. It has tap, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. It also has pay 2 and exile it, shuffle any number of cards from your graveyard into your library. If you get this early, it's just going to help you mill more and more, and when you need it to, it will protect the pieces in your graveyard if someone is trying to exile them. And then there's Sadistic Hypnotist. For 3 black, this is a 2/2 human minion creature. With this ability, sacrifice a creature, target player discards 2 cards. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. This is one of my favorite cards because it goes into one of my all-time favorite combos in any graveyard deck ever. Are you ready for it? It's super evil. Here we go. Cast Victimize for 2 and a black. Sacrifice a creature, then return 2 other creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield. You're going to choose Sadistic Hypnotist and Izoni Thousand-Eyed. Izoni is going to come into the battlefield and most likely create 6 or 7 or 10 or 20 tokens along with her, which you're going to sacrifice to the Sadistic Hypnotist to make all of your opponents discard all of the cards in their hands. And they're going to hate you, and you're going to love it. One side note here, the Sadistic Hypnotist ability can only be activated at sorcery speed, which means someone can respond to the first time you activate this ability and then kill it, which is going to prevent you from activating it anymore. So if at all possible, you want to wait to play this until you feel like your opponents are missing answers or just when they're tapped out. So now that we've shown off some of the cards in the deck, let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the deck and how well we think it can do. The 2 main strengths for any graveyard-based deck that really go hand in hand are going to be card advantage and resilience. When you're able to play cards out of your graveyard, you can almost treat your graveyard like a second hand, so you are always going to have more cards available to you than your opponents are. And your opponents can kill your stuff as much as they want, you're just going to get it back. And it's just going to cost you less resources to play the same things over and over again than it's going to cost your opponents to remove those things over and over. Decks like this tend to do really well against other creature-based decks and control decks. The longer the game goes, the more of an advantage we'll have over our opponents, so if we can't get in a quick win, we really want to just grind things out as long as possible. Our biggest weakness is going to be a lack of interaction. Our worst opponents are going to be combo players. Anyone who can do their thing faster than we can, or who can hold off long enough to do it before we can kill them, they're just going to win because we can't stop them. As far as rating this deck a 1 out of 10, I'd probably give it a 6. The deck knows what it wants to do, and it's going to be able to do it pretty well, so I think you're going to have the advantage in a meta with other 5s and 6s, and you're probably going to be able to hold your own with 7s even, but once you start hitting 8s and 9s, that's when it's really going to take a skilled pilot to get anywhere with the deck as it is. You're really going to need some upgrades before the deck can consistently compete at that level. Speaking of upgrades, there are a couple different paths you can go down to make this deck more competitive based around the level that you need it to be. If you want to keep the deck around a 7 to an 8, you can go down an aristocrat style path and really focus on how often you are sacrificing your creatures. This is the path that I often go for because I think it's a lot of fun, and it's still going to let you compete with the more powerful decks without completely overwhelming the less powerful ones. If you want to go down this path, I suggest you look for more creatures with edict effects like Fleshbag Marauder. Look for cards like Midnight Reaper, which will draw you cards whenever you sacrifice creatures, and of course you will need those enchantments Grave Pact and Dictative Erebos, which will make your opponents sacrifice creatures every time you do. If you want to ramp the deck up to more 8 to 9 levels, that's where you're going to need to start adding in some combos to get insta wins. The easiest way to do that in our colors is going to be the Protean Hulk combo. So that is my Jarad Golgari Lich Lord budget deck. You should be seeing screenshots right now for the $50 paper list and the 10 ticket Magic Online list. If you're at all curious, the paper prices were pulled from tcgplayer.com, while the MTGO prices were pulled from cardhoarder.com. I'll also include links to the deck lists in the description below. So guys, what do you think about this budget Jarad deck? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you think something else would maybe make it a bit better? Tell me what you think in the comments down below. And if there's a specific kind of deck or commander that you'd like to see in the future, go ahead and let me know down there too. Well guys, thank you so much for checking out this video, and don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to know when the next one goes up. That's all for Singletons this week, but I hope to see you real soon.